Hey everybody, I'm going to continue reading Left Behind. I'm up to the third chapter right now, but first I'll read the description, the synopsis. In one cataclysmic moment, millions around the globe disappear. Vehicles, suddenly unmanned, careen out of control. People are terror-stricken as loved ones vanish before their eyes. Some blame space aliens. Others claim a freak of nature. Still others say it was a high-tech military attack by a world conqueror. But airline captain Rayford Steele's wife had warned of this very event. If Irene Steele was right, both she and her young son have disappeared. What about their older daughter? Like Rayford, Chloe had been skeptical. In the midst of global chaos, Rayford must search for his family, for answers, for truth. As devastating as disappearances have been, the darkest days may lie ahead. In his moving novel, Jerry B. Jenkins and Tim LaHaye offer account of what life might be like for those left behind when millions vanish. Left Behind will intrigue you, entertain you, and challenge you. And when you realize it represents an event that millions believe will actually occur, it could change your life. So yeah, Chapter 3. Hadi Durham, one of her cabin crew, encouraged passengers to study the safety cards in their seat pockets. Many feared they would be unable to jump and slide down the chutes, especially with their carry-on luggage. They were starting to remove their shoes and jump seat first onto the chute. Then crew members would toss them their shoes and bags. They were advised not to wait in the terminal for their checked baggage. Then they were promised to eventually be delivered to their homes. No guarantees when. Buck Williams gave Hadi his card and got her phone number, just in case I get through to your people before you do. You're with Global Weekly, she said. I had no idea. And you were going to send me to my room for tampering with the phone. She appears to be trying to smile. Sorry, Buck said. Not funny. I'll let you go. Always a light traveler, Buck was grateful that he had checked no baggage. Never did, not even on international flights. When he opened the bin to pull down his other bag, he found the old man's hat and jacket still perched atop of it. Harold's wife sat staring at Buck, her eyes full, jaw set. Ma'am, he said quietly, would you want these? The grieving woman briefly gathered in the hat and coat and crushed them against her chest as if she would never let them go. She said something Buck couldn't hear. He asked her to repeat it. I can't jump out of any airplane, she said. Stay right here, he said. They'll send someone for you. But will he still have to jump and slide down that thing? No, ma'am. I'm sure they'll have a lifter of some sort. Buck carefully laid his laptop and case in among his clothes. With his bag zipped, he hurried to the front of the line, eager to show others how easy it was. He tossed his shoes down first, watching them bounce and skitter onto the runway. Then he clutched his bag across his chest, took a quick step, and threw his feet out in front of him. A bit enthusiastic, he landed not on his seat, but on his shoulders, which threw his feet over the top of his head. He picked up speed and hit the bottom with his weight flip shifting forward. The buggy whip centripetal force slammed his sucking feet to the ground and brought his torso up and over into somersault that barely missed planting his face in the concrete. At the last instant, still hanging onto his bag for dear life, he tucked his head under and took the abrasion on the back of his head rather than on his nose. He fought the urge to say, no problem, but he couldn't keep from rubbing the back of his head, already matted with blood. It wasn't a serious problem, only a nuisance. He quickly retrieved his shoes and began jogging toward the terminal as much from embarrassment as need. He knew there would be no hurrying once he hit the terminal. Rayford, Christopher, and Hattie were the last three off the 747. Before disembarking, they made sure all able-bodied people got down the chutes and that the elderly infirm were transported by bus. The bus driver insisted the crew ride with him, and the last passengers of Rayford refused. I can't see passing on to my own passengers as they walk to the terminal, he said. How would that look? Christopher said, suit yourself, Cap. You mind if I take him up on his offer? Rayford glared at him. You're serious? I don't get paid enough for this. Like, this is the airline's fault. Chris, you don't mean it. The heck I don't. By the time you get up there, you'll wish you had ridden too. I should write you up for this. Millions of people disappear into thin air, and I should worry about getting written up for riding instead of walking? Later, Steele. Rayford shook his head and turned to Hadi. Maybe if I'll see you up there. If you can get out of the terminal, don't wait for me. Are you kidding? If you're walking, I'm walking. You don't need to do that. After dressing down, you just gave Smith, I'm walking. He's first officer. You want to be last off the ship and first to volunteer for emergency duty. Well, do me a favor, consider me part of your crew too. Just because I can't fly the thing doesn't mean I don't feel some ownership. And don't treat me like a little woman. I would never do that. Got your stuff? Hadi pulled their bag on wheels and Rayford carried his navigator's leather box. It was a long walk, and several times they waved off offers of rides from units speeding out to pick up the non-ambulatory. Along the way, they passed other passengers from their flight. Many thanked Rayford, he wasn't sure for what. For not panicking, he guessed, but he looked as terrified as shell-shocked as he felt. They shielded their ears from flights screaming into land. Rayford tried to calculate how long he would be before this runway was shut down too. He couldn't imagine the other open strip holding many more planes either. With some of them to try to put down on highways or open fields. And how far away from the big cities where they had to look for open stretches of highway unencumbered by bridges? He shuddered at the thought. All around were ambulances and other emergency vehicles trying to get to ugly wreckage scenes. Finally, in the terminal, Rayford found crowds standing in lines behind banks of phones. Most of the angry people waiting, yelling at callers who shrugged and redialed. Airport snack bars and restaurants are already sold out or low on food, and all newspapers and magazines were gone. In shops where staffers had disappeared, looters walked off with merchandise. Rayford wanted more than anything to sit and talk with someone about what to make of this. But everybody he saw, friend, acquaintance, or stranger, was busy trying to make arrangements. O'Hare was like a massive prison with resources dwindling and gridlock growing. No one slept. Everyone scurried about, trying to find some link to the outside world, trying to contact their families to get out of the airport. As the flights entered the bowels of the police, Rayford found much of the same thing. Holly said she would try to make her calls from the lounge and would meet him later to see if they could share a ride to the suburbs. He knew they were unlikely to find any rides going anywhere, and he didn't relish in walking 20 miles. But all hotels in the area were already full. Finally, the supervisor asked for the attention of the flyers in the underground center. "We have some secure lines about 5, he said. "Whether you can get through, whether we don't know, but it's your best chance. They do bypass the normal truck lines out of here, so they won't be competing with all the payphones in the terminal. Streamline your calls. Also, there are a limited number of helicopter rides available to suburban hospitals and police departments, but naturally, you're secondary to medical emergencies. Get in line over here for phones or rides to the suburbs. As of right now, we have no word of the cancellation of any flights except for the remainder of today. It's a responsibility to be back here for your next flight or to call in and find out its status." Rayford got in line, beginning to feel the tension of having flown too long and known too little. Worse was the knowledge that he had a better idea than most of what had happened. If he was right, if it were true, he would not be getting an answer when he dialed home. As he stood there, a TV monitor above him broadcast images of the chaos. From around the globe came wailing mothers, stoic families, reports of death and destruction. Dozens of stories included eyewitnesses who had seen loved ones and friends disappear before their eyes. Most shocking to Rayford was a woman in labor about to go into the delivery room who was suddenly barren. Doctors delivered the placenta. Her husband had caught the disappearance of the fetus on tape. As he videotaped her great belly and sweaty face, he asked questions. How did she feel? How do you think I feel, Earl? Turn that thing off. What was she hoping for? That they get close enough for me to slug you? Did you realize that in a few moments they'll be parents? In about a minute, you're going to be divorced. Then came the scream and the dropping of the camera, terrified voices, running nurses, and the doctor. CNN ran the footage in slow motion, showing the woman going from very pregnant to nearly flat-stomached as if she had instantaneously delivered. Now watch this again, the newsman intoned, and keep your eyes on the left edge of your screen, where a nurse appears to be reading a printout from the fetal heart monitor. There, see? The action stopped as the pregnant woman's stomach deflated. The nurse's uniform seems to be still be standing as if an invisible person is wearing it. She's gone. Half a second later, watch. The tape moved ahead and stopped. The uniform, stockings, and all are in a pile atop her shoes. Local television stations from around the world reported bizarre occurrences, especially in time zones where the event had happened during the day or early evening. CNN showed via satellite the video of a groom disappearing while slipping the ring onto his bride's finger. A funeral home in Australia reported that nearly every mourner disappeared from one memorial service, including the corpse, while at another service at the same time, only a few disappeared and the corpse remained. Morgues also reported corpse disappearances. At a burial, 3 of the 6 pallbearers stumbled and dropped a casket where the other 3 disappeared. When they picked up the casket, it too was empty. Rayford was second in line for the phone, but what he saw next on the screen convinced him that he would never see his wife again. At a Christian high school soccer game and a missionary headquarters in Indonesia, most of the spectators and all but one of the players disappeared in the middle of the play, leaving their shoes and uniforms on the ground. The CNN reporter announced that in his remorse, the surviving player took his own life. But it was more than remorse, Rayford knew. Of all people, that player, a student at Christian school, would have known the truth immediately. The rapture had taken place. Jesus Christ had returned for his people, and that boy was not one of them. When Rayford sat at the phone, tears streamed on his face. Someone said, "You have 4 minutes," and he knew that would be more than he needed. His answering machine at the home picked up immediately, and he was pierced to hear the cheerful voice of his wife. "Your call is important to us," she said. "Please leave a message up after the beep." Rayford punched a few buttons to check her messages. He ran through 3 or 4 mundane ones, then was startled to hear Chloe's voice. "Mom? Dad? Are you there? Have you seen what's going on? Call me as soon as you can. We lost at least 10 students and 2 profs, and all the Mary students' kids disappeared. Is Raimi alright? Call me." Well, at least he knew Chloe was still around. All he wanted was to hold her. Rayford redialed the message on his own machine. "Irene? Ray? If you're there, pick up. If you get this message, I'm at O'Hare and trying to get home. It may take a while if I don't get a copter ride. I'm sure hope you're there." "Let's go, Cap," someone said. "Everybody's got a call to make." Rayford nodded and quickly dialed his daughter's dorm room at Stanford. He got the irritating message as the call could not be completed as dialed. Rayford got his belongings and checked his mail slot. Besides a pile of the usual junk, he found a padded envelope from his home address. Irene had taken to mailing him little surprises lately, the result of a marriage book she had been urging him to read. He slipped the envelope into his case when looking for Hottie Durham. Funny he found no emotional attraction whatsoever to Hottie just now, but he felt obligated to be sure she got home. As he stood in a crowd by the elevator, he heard the announcement that a helicopter was available for no more than 8 pilots and would make a run to Mount Prospect, Arlington Heights, and Des Plaines. Rayford hurried to the pad. Got room for one to Mount Prospect? Yep. How about another Des Plaines? Maybe if it gets here in about 2 minutes. It's not a he. She's a flight attendant. Pilots only. Sorry. What if you have room? Well, maybe, but I don't see her. I'll have her paged. They're not paging anymore. Give me a second. Don't leave without me. The driver pilot looked at his watch. 3 minutes, he said. I'm leaving at 1. Rayford left his bag on the ground, hoping he would behold the helicopter pilot in case he was a little late. He charged up the stairs into the corridor. Finding Hottie would be impossible. He grabbed a courtesy phone. I'm sorry, we're unable to page anyone just now. This is an emergency, and I'm a Pan Continental captain. What is it? Have Hottie Durham meet or party at K-17. I'll try. Do it. Rayford stood on tiptoe to see Hottie coming, yet still somehow she surprised him. It was fourth in line for the phone in the lounge, she said, peering at his side. Got a better deal? Got his helicopter ride if we hurry, he said. As they skipped down the stairs, she said, Wasn't it awful about Chris? What about him? You really don't know? River wanted to stop and tell her to quit making him work so hard. That frustrated him about people her age. They enjoyed a volleying conversation game. He liked to get to the point. Just tell me, he said, sounding more exasperated than he intended. As they burst through the door onto the tarmac, the chopper blades whipped their hair and deepened them. Rayford's bag had already been put on board, and only one seat remained. The pilot pointed at Hottie and shook his head. Rayford grabbed her elbow and pulled her aboard as he climbed in. Only way she's not coming is if you can handle the weight. What do you weigh, doll? The pilot said. 115. I can handle the weight, he told Rayford. But if she's not buckled in, I'm not responsible. Let's go, Rayford shouted. He buckled himself in and Hottie sat in his lap. He wrapped his arms around her waist and clasped his wrists together. He thought how ironic it was that he had been dreaming of this for weeks, and now there was no joy, no excitement in it, nothing sensual whatsoever. He was miserable. Glad to be able to help her out, but miserable. Hottie looked embarrassed and uncomfortable, and Rayford noticed she took a sheepish peek at the other 7 pilots of the copter. None seemed to return her gaze. Disaster was still too fresh, and there were too many unknowns. Rayford thought he heard or lip-read one of them saying Christopher Smith, but there was no way he could hear inside the raucous craft. He put his mouth next to Hottie's ear. Now what about Chris? He said. She turned and spoke into his ear. They wheeled him past us while I was going to the lounge. Blood all over. What happened? I don't know, but Rayford, he didn't look good. How bad? I think he was dead. I mean, they were working on him. I'd be surprised if he made it. Rayford shook his head. What next? Did he get hit or something? Did that bus crash? Wouldn't that be ironic? I don't know, she said, but the blood seemed like it was coming from his hand or his waist or both. Rayford tapped the pilot on the shoulder. Do you know anything about First Officer Christopher Smith? He with PanCon, the pilot said. Yes. Was he the suicide? Rayford recoiled. I don't think so. Was there a suicide? Lots of them, I guess, but mostly passengers. Only crew member I heard was of Smith from Pan slit his wrists. Rayford quickly scanned the others in the chopper to see if he recognized anyone. He didn't, but one was nodding sadly, but having overheard the pilot shouting. He leaned forward. Chris Smith, you know him? My first officer. Sorry? What'd you hear? Don't know how reliable this is, but the rumor is he found his boy has disappeared and his wife was killed in the wreck. For the first time, an enormity of the situation became personal. Rayford. He didn't know Smith well. He vaguely remembered Chris had 2 sons. It seemed like they were young teenagers, very close in age. He never met the wife. But suicide. Was that an option, Rayford? No, not with Chloe still there. But what if he discovered that Irene and young Ray were gone and Chloe had been killed? What would he have to live for? He hadn't been living for them anyway, certainly not the last several months. He had been playing around on the edges of his mind with the girl in his lap, though he had never gone so far as touching her, even when she often touched him. Would he want to live with Hottie Durham, the only person he cared about? And why did he care about her? She was beautiful and sexy and smart, but only for her age. They had little in common. Was it only because he was convinced Irene was gone, now he now longed to hold his own life? There was no affection in his embrace of Hottie Durham just now, nor in hers. Both were scared to death, and flirting was the last thing on their minds. The irony was not lost on him. He recalled that the last thing he daydreamed about, before Hottie's announcement was finally making a move on her. How could he have known that she would be in his lap hours later, and he would have no more interest in her than in a stranger? The first stop was the Des Plaines Police Department, where Hottie disembarked. Rayford advised her to ask for a ride home with the police if a squad car was available. Most had been pressed into service in or more congested areas, so that was unlikely. I'm only about a mile from here anyway, Hottie shouted above the roar as Rayford held her from the chopper. I can walk. She wrapped her arms around his neck in a fierce embrace, and he felt her quiver in fear. Hope everyone's okay at your place, she said. Call me and let me know, okay? He nodded. Okay, she insisted. Okay. As lifted off, he watched her survey the parking lot. Spotting no squad cars, she turned and hurried off, pulling her suitcase on wheels. By the time the helicopter began to swing toward Mountain Prospect, Hottie was trotting toward her condominium. Okay, so that's part 1 of Left Behind Chapter 3. Take care, everybody.